Here are the headlines this hour. A historic step for the European Union. It's just to come to a landmark banking deal that marks one of the biggest transfers of national sovereignty since the introduction of the euro. Human rights groups say close to 1,000 people were killed in just 2 days of violence in the Central African Republic. Amnesty International is pointing the finger at the country's mostly Muslim rogue rebels in a rampage of revenge over deadly Christian militia attacks. And could the U.S. spy agency, the NSA, scale back on its methods? A White House-picked panel recommends curbs like letting only phone companies hold U.S. phone records and giving only the president the right to okay spying on foreign leaders. Hello everyone, I'm Jeannie Godula in Paris. Also coming up this hour in sports, a football-loving Pope Francis gets a trophy and a goalkeeper's glove. That's after his favorite team, San Lorenzo, clinches the Argentine title. And you'll meet one of the two directors of animated blockbuster Despicable Me and Despicable Me 2, and surprise, he's French. Well, let's start now with that historic step for the European Union. It's just come to a landmark banking deal that marks one of the biggest transfers of national sovereignty since the introduction of the euro. France 24's Oliver Ferry has more now on the new banking union that's aimed at preventing a repeat of the crippling crises that have already hit the eurozone.
The European Banking Union deal aims to prevent member states getting burned by bad banks, but it came about only after protracted negotiations. Brussels will have a range of new powers to curtail the effects of banking failures. The deal will add to the existing supervision by the ECB, a new agency to wind up failing banks, and deposits under €100,000 will be guaranteed. The new agency, known as the Single Resolution Mechanism, will close toxic banks before things get out of hand.
We are introducing revolutionary changes to Europe's financial sector, so that taxpayers no longer foot the bill.
Banks will also be expected to contribute to a special fund for bank closures to be phased in over 10 years. But that's unlikely to be enough, and additional financing may come from the Eurozone bailout fund, the European Stability Mechanism. That's a sticking point among certain EU members, particularly Germany. Nonetheless, the German finance minister said the deal was the right way forward.
This is an important step. It was very controversial for a long time because the interests here varied widely. That's why I think what we're building is the right contribution to further stabilizing financial markets.
The deal now goes to the European Parliament, where it is hoped it will be passed before the current Parliament's term ends in May.
Well, that banking union deal came just hours before the EU summit kicks off in Brussels. European leaders are set to discuss joint defence for the first time in 5 years. Britain and Germany are aiming to downgrade plans for deeper EU military cooperation. But France, for its part, wants to add a new line on EU funding for unilateral interventions like its current operation in the Central African Republic. Meanwhile, a new report from Amnesty International says close to 1,000 people were killed in the Central African Republic capital of Bangui 2 weeks ago. That humanitarian group points the finger at the country's mostly Muslim rogue rebels in their rampage to avenge other deadly attacks from Christian militant groups. Things are calmer in Bangui now, but the French army and humanitarian groups are facing a new tragedy. It's thought some 5,000 children have been orphaned since the conflict began. Henry Brown has more on these displaced children, just a few of whom are being taken to nearby orphanages with the help of UNICEF.
Playing as children do, yet these have fled massacres. 20,000 people live in this camp for displaced persons in Bangui. Off to one side, the youngest of them are literally traumatized. Silent, sad, in dire need of being talked to, Brother Claver offers them caring support.
Alors, qu'est-ce que tu as vécu?
Moi et mon père, nous serons à la maison. Il m'a envoyé pour acheter du café. Le Séléka venait, il a tué mon père.
Naomi will be taken to an orphanage, but there are only 2 places. The choice is difficult for brother Claver. Saint-Cyr, a 10-year-old boy, will also leave the makeshift camp.
They don't really have any joie de vivre. Sometimes they say to you, why should I stay here like this if I have to continue to suffer?
UNICEF is helping these children regain a taste for life, but for the time being it's a heartbreaking moment for the young girl. The orphanage is only a few kilometers away.
You're here with others. You'll get food. You can play and wash. You'll be fine here.
As thousands of other orphans remain stuck in refugee camps, Naomi is clearly one of the lucky ones.
Well, in the latest from South Sudan, rebels loyal to the fugitive former vice president have reportedly seized the key town of Bor, the world's newest nations being torn about by fighting between soldiers loyal to the country's president and to that former deputy. 500 people have been killed so far in the 5 days since the clashes began. Clashes that seem to be splitting South Sudan along ethnic lines. Meanwhile, Uganda says the UN has asked its president to help mediate in the conflict in the neighboring South Sudan.
The streets of Juba may be calmer, but American embassy staff are being evacuated nonetheless. Britain is also preparing to help their citizens leave, and other Western nations are expected to follow. For those who cannot leave, the UN compounds in the capital remain their only refuge, with almost 20,000 people continuing to rely on the United Nations.
This is a political crisis and urgently needs to be dealt with through political dialogue. There is a risk of this violence spreading to other states, as we have already seen some signs of this.
The crisis began on Sunday when rival groups of soldiers began fighting. President Salva Kiir has accused his former vice president, Riek Machar, of orchestrating a coup.
It was a military coup attempt, and that it has failed.
Machar subsequently spoke to a local newspaper, denying any involvement with the fighting. President Kiir has said he is ready for any dialogue with Machar, and the government is trying to reassure local residents that the conflict is under control. Locals, however, are unconvinced. Many still come back to the camp, where they can also find medical care.
We are dealing with children. We have about 4 very sick children with severe malaria and bronchopneumonia. We've also seen some gunshot injuries, very minor, which we've dressed, about 6 of them this morning.
With reports of violence spreading beyond the capital, Juba, there are fears that any escalation could seriously destabilize the world's youngest nation.
Next, a White House-appointed panel has issued a massive report filled with curbs on the controversial National Security Agency. If President Barack Obama follows even half of those recommendations, it would mean the NSA would significantly change the way it does business. Some of those recommendations include handing the collection of U.S. phone records to phone companies alone and making sure the president signs off personally on spying on foreign leaders. Nicholas Rushworth has more.
NSA snooping powers could be significantly constrained. The White House's own review panel has 46 recommendations, among them an end of collection of mass phone records, no wholesale government storage of phone data, and for that phone data to be held by telecoms providers or a third party. The White House Review Group expressed deep skepticism about the value and effectiveness of the metadata program, arguing it has only made a modest contribution to the nation's security.
It's a substantive, lengthy report, and it merits serious review and assessment. When we finish the internal review, the overall internal review in January, the President will deliver remarks to outline the outcomes of our work.
The US President has already signaled he won't agree with one suggestion that it should be possible for a civilian to head the NSA instead of a top general. The proposals come 2 days after a federal judge ruled that the NSA's mass surveillance program was unconstitutional and almost Orwellian. And as NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden offers to help Brazil dig deeper into NSA activities, he said he could do so in exchange for political asylum. Snowden's leaks have provoked outrage about US mass surveillance worldwide and a debate on how much spying should be carried out.
Well, there's been more fallout on the arrest of the Indian diplomat in the U.S. She was detained and strip-searched following allegations of visa fraud and underpaying her maid. Well, people in India and Punjab took to the streets to protest. India is now demanding the U.S. drop the case.
Indian protesters angry at the United States and its treatment of the Indian diplomat Devyani Khobragade. She was strip-searched last week in New York after being arrested on charges of visa fraud and underpaying her nanny. Her father has praised the Indian government and media for their support.
Yeah, government has done take a very proactive step. I am grateful to the government, grateful to Muse Jada to I am grateful to all of you. You created such a sentiment, entire nation sentiment. You represent. So government has done that.
Given the scale of the outrage in India, Washington is in damage limitation mode. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry called a top Indian official to express his regret.
3 things at the top. On our side, we've said it was a positive conversation. I believe folks on the Indian side may have now as well. And what we're focused on is moving forward. And I do think it was a good opportunity for the Secretary to very directly express his regret and talk about where we go from here.
Khobragade is free on bail after giving up her passport and pleading not guilty to charges. She faces a maximum of 15 years in jail if convicted on both counts. A lawyer says his client was humiliated and her case mishandled.
We hope that we won't ever have to address the actual charges in court, because we hope and expect that from a diplomatic level, this case will be resolved.
India has ordered a series of reprisals, including removing protective barricades outside the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi.
All right, it's now time to take a trip up into the stars. That's what the European Space Agency that's just launched its star surveying satellite. It's called Gaia, and it launched earlier today from French Guiana. That satellite will create the most precise 3D map of about 1 billion stars in our galaxy and its immediate neighborhood. Jonathan Crane reports.
3, 2, 1, top, décollage.
After 20 years in the making, liftoff for the Gaia satellite. On board the Russian rocket Soyuz, the satellite aims to shine more of a light on our galaxy, the Milky Way. During its 5-year mission, scientists hope Gaia will map out the position of 1 billion stars, though that's just 1% of what's in the Milky Way. The telescope could also detect new planets and warn of asteroids that may one day threaten Earth. The European Space Agency's project, the most sophisticated ever attempted by Europe, cost €740 million. But scientists say the money's well spent.
For every professional astronomer, there is no need to explain how fundamental Gaia is. Everyone knows that when you get the distances to stars, it's the basic of all the rest of the astronomy, and everyone is looking forward to get this data in hands.
Once on its own in space, the satellite will use 2 telescopes to build a 3D map of our section of the galaxy. By repeating the procedure over and over, it can be accurate to near zero margins. The telescopes are so sensitive they could measure a person's thumbnail from the moon. The mission follows in the footsteps of NASA's Hubble Space Telescope and the ESA's pioneering Hipparcos satellite, which mapped out 100,000 stars until its operation ended in 1993.
You're watching France 24. Let's take a quick look at the headlines this hour. A historic step for the European Union.